tomorrow or Thursday, the 15th, right?
Thursday.
Thursday, okay. Yeah.
I'm going to give people till about 12:02 and then we're going to kick off, okay?
Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds
and
good.
Daryl is starting us off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you see that question, Jen? Do you want to look that up, the polling places for early voting?
Once you guys start talking, I can add that into the chat.
Okay.
Gabby, I'll put
Yeah.
a link down so you can see it. Are you in Mecklenburg, Gabby?
Yeah, I'm in Charlotte.
Okay.
Gabby, it's been so good to see you at so many events. I've been seeing you at a lot of things. That's good.
Me?
Gabby.
Oh, I was like, where, Daryl?
No, Gabby's been coming out to a lot of things that's been going on. It's
Good job, Gabby. Okay, so for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. You'll notice you have a different host today. My name is Jen Martz. I am the director for the Wells Fargo Center of Community Engagement here. I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of every single Tuesday to join us for these wonderful lunch and learn opportunities. If you can do me a favor, if you are not currently muted or if I haven't gotten a chance to mute you yet, please go ahead and take a second and mute yourself to avoid any feedback. This session's a little bit different. We have 3 different folks today that are going to be talking to us, but they're going to lead up the coffee talk session, so it'll be more interactive with you all. And we can do more of a conversation approach to this session. As always, this will be recorded and available on our website, QU_votes. On Instagram, you can follow us as well. We have 3 weeks till the election, so please, if anyone that needs more information or wants to become a more educated voter, send them to our sessions. Okay, so to introduce our speakers today, first of all, we have Reverend Joey Haynes. He serves as the chaplain and director of the Davies Center for Faith and Outreach at Queens. He grew up in Southern West Virginia and graduated from Queens in 2011. Joey received his Master's of Divinity from Union Presbyterian Seminary and was ordained as a minister at Park Road Baptist in 2018. Joey, can you wave so everyone can see you? Wonderful. Our next presenter is Daryl White Sr. He started his role as the Assistant Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement at Queens University in Charlotte in November of 2016. He recently retired from the U.S. March 2020 after 34 years of service. Thank you for your service, Daryl. Daryl is a 92 grad of Queens where he majored in sociology and is currently pursuing a Master's of Science in Organization and Development at Queens, and he'll be a graduate of 2021. Almost there. And finally, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Judy Schindler is the Sculp Professor of Jewish Studies and Director of the Stan Greenspon Center for Peace and Social Justice at Queens. She was named Rabbi Emerita of Temple Bethel in Charlotte, North Carolina, after serving as senior rabbi from 2003 to 2016. She is an author and an activist, a wife and a mother of 2 sons who are currently in college. And so I'm going to pass the torch and let them start the conversation. I think Daryl is going to kick us off.
All right. Well, thank you, Jen, and thank you, Judy and Joey and everyone else for being here with us. So, just when we think about conversations that we've had on campus, myself and Rabbi Judy and Joey, and we sit around in the coffee shop and we talk about, just things that impact, our students, faculty, staff, and just, society in general. And this was just like a natural conversation for us to be able to come together and do this, even though we're not sitting at the coffee shop. I've got my ice cold water here with my Queens mug, so that's the best I can do this time of day for, instead of coffee. But, as I think about this upcoming election, I think about just like the students that we work with every day and just all the identities and things that they have to think about in terms of this upcoming election and why it's important for them. Also thinking about so many of them, this will be their first time voting in a major election, and I've heard that from so many of them. and just thinking about all the things that are on their minds about, you know, whether it has to do with race relations, it has to do with immigration, it has to do with the economy. There's just so many things that are like right there staring them in the face. You know, in past elections, you maybe had where, you know, it wasn't as obvious as a young person, you know, how does this really impact me? But I think nowadays, what we're looking at is that, you know, it's pretty obvious, and no matter, you know, what side you're on or what concerns you have, I think there's something in it for everybody, and it's just to really understand the importance of just going through this democratic process and really being able to say, okay, you know, it's a right that I have, and it's also a duty that I feel like I have to others to engage in this right. And so I just think about, you know, us and some of those conversations that we would be having leading up to the election, after the election, making sure that people are comfortable with, you know, just being able to let their voices be heard. And so, you know, just lots of emotions, lots of thoughts that I have around the election right now. And so, you know, just to kick it off to you too, and, you know, maybe hear some of your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate being here, and also I do, in fact, have my coffee. And as much as I miss, being around campus with you all, I think on this topic of just social justice and equity and diversity, I think what I have appreciated most about being at Queens is being able to not just work within our own space, within our own departments. And I think this is sort of an important concept to think about, especially if you are interested in, social change and working across diverse spaces in order to work for that common good. And so in the interfaith world, we often talk about bridged social capital, this idea that, yes, in the chaplain's office, typically we're, working around topics of religion, but that doesn't mean that we have to stay in that sort of silo, right? And so I think what I've just appreciated, about working with Daryl and Judy is this opportunity where we actually get to bridge these divides and actually work together. And you see this in Charlotte, all the time. And I think, Judy, a lot of the work that you do, you do bridge so many different communities and trying to get, both at Queens within our different departments, but also out in the broader Charlotte community, that it's not just sort of when it comes to these issues of diversity and equity, that we don't have to just work in our own silos, right? That it's important to sort of bridge these gaps, bridge these diverse communities to work toward that common good. And so, yeah, I think, Judy, you've, and a lot of the work that you do in the Greenspond Center, I think that you have some really good examples of how you work across this diversity for that common good, for social justice issues, for equity, diversity issues. And yes, I think if you, wanted to sort of talk a little bit about that and about that bridge to social capital as well.
Wonderful. So it is through bridges, building bridges, that we create change. If we're each in our own silo, or each in our own sanctuaries, or each in our own communities or neighborhoods, we're not sort of expanding the work of the community and working for that greater common good and building the relationships that are so critical for a safe and healthy and successful society. So what is this thing called social justice? It's hard to define. It makes people a little nervous. When I talk to congregations about the work, like, how do you bring your faith, the words of your faith, like love your neighbor, or love the stranger, how do you bring those words from inside your sanctuary into the community? Well, if you went to your faith community and said, I want to do the work of social justice, they're going to give you all the reasons probably not to do the work of social justice. Like, we should just stay focused inside our sanctuary and not in the world, or, we're going to create tension and we're going to lose members, or, we're just meant to be spiritual and not political. That's the big thing. So the word civic engagement goes over a lot better than the word social justice if you were going to your congregation, for example, where they're worried about keeping their members, or creating sort of some tension, even positive tension, in your organization. So what is this thing called social justice. So we have social service. We know that that's feeding the hungry, right? Room in the inn, housing the homeless, all the very important work that we do of stocking our pantries so those students who can't afford food have food to eat, and opening up the chapel so those who don't have homes have a place to sleep. That is social service. And then there's something called social justice. It is called going upstream. So social activists have a parable that they tell. Parables are a good way to transmit values. There's a village, and in the village, there was someone drowning in the river nearby, and someone jumped into the river and pulled that person to safety and was hailed as a hero. Well, a week later, someone else was drowning in the river, and again, another person jumped into the river and pulled that person to safety. So the village had a great idea. Let's get lots of lifeguards, right? And let's line the river so that whenever somebody is drowning in the river, we can pull them out of the currents and save them. And the village invested a lot of money into lifeguards saving lives. And finally, someone said, well, why don't we go upstream and see why people are falling into the river in the first place? Right? So social service is about alleviating hardship for those who are hungry or at risk for losing their homes or unemployed or struggling, facing healthcare inequities, racial injustice. There is literally doing the life-saving work, and then there's going upstream and eradicating the root causes of the hardship. So social justice is about changing systems to eradicate root causes. We need to do both. There will always be people falling into the rivers of hard times, but we also can create systemic and structural changes to change the realities for today. And that's what social justice is about. It's about going upstream to change systems so that people are not falling into those hard times. We'll talk about the cycle of social change in a little bit. We're in a conversation, but where does voter engagement fall into this? Where does voter engagement fit in this puzzle of social change and systemic change? Well, one of the key ways in which we make change is legislation. So if we vote in people who have the values that we value, those things that are most important to us, and we really need to soul search what matters most to us, and we need to make sure that the candidates for whom we're voting reflect those values. Even better, before that, to really get engaged with your candidates and push them and tell them, this matters to me. You will have my vote if you are, good on this issue, whether it's environmental sustainability or healthcare for all, or what issues matter to you, no matter what those issues are and where you fall on the spectrum, the political spectrum. So there's pre-engagement, making sure the candidates know how you feel. There's voting for your candidates. And then there's the after work, right? Because our candidates still need our support once they're in office, right? Number one, they need our support to move forward their change, to know that they have a lot of people behind them and building power, supporting them and trying to move other legislators. And number two is holding them accountable, because we know that it does happen that a candidate makes promises, and once they get into office, they're not so quick to follow through on those promises. So that engagement happens before you vote, it happens when you vote, and that engagement happens after you vote to make sure you are holding your candidates responsible and accountable for fulfilling the commitments they made to you as a voter. So I will throw the ball back to, I don't know, Joey, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking, or I'm curious about, in whatever sort of profession, jobs we have, especially if we are working in the faith community or working in positions of, neutrality, essentially. I'm just sort of curious how we sort of navigate being political but not being partisan, right? So how do we advocate for certain equity issues, certain diversity issues, and be able to advocate for those common goods that is good for all people? But how do we do this in a way that isn't necessarily sort of like telling people how to vote? Yeah, that's just sort of a question. I don't know, Daryl, Judy, if you have.
Joe,
So I guess the first thing I think about, I think about just all the times that we've convened just space for people to sit around and have conversations, So I think when we're all people, regardless of the roles that we're in, and so we all have a position, right? And it's the difference between forcing that position on someone else or just kind of giving them a broader picture of the options that they may have, and I think there's a big difference there. So I just think that, from, all that Judy was sharing just now, and I think about the times that we have sat down together, how much I learned from each of you and just other people in general, just to sit down and actually hear them out and hear why they're concerned about some things, what issues are important to them. And that always, I always learn more when it's people who are, who do have some different views, that's really where we grow and we educate ourselves more, when we talk to people who have different views. And so I feel like that's a big part of this whole process, is understanding, why people maybe are voting a certain way, or why people have certain views about things, because none of us is going to get all of what we want, but it's really trying to educate ourselves on the different parts of it. So that's just, I try to, in my role, I try to stay to a point where I'm not necessarily telling people where to go or what to do, but more or less kind of making sure that, we have those reflection points where we can think a little bit deeper about what it is and why we're doing what we do. And I think that's where we try to come in and make sure that we create those spaces, safe spaces, where people can actually have conversation about some of these things. Judy, I think you were going to add something.
Yeah. I was going to add something. In researching congregations who do an excellent job at social justice and interviewing, 50 individuals engaged in this work, I've seen different models for it, but there's a really interesting model that one congregation does called the traction model. So you, first of all, always start with listening, right? If you want to take a group and teach them how to get engaged in social justice, you start with listening. What matters? Let's say we started with our freshman class and really had tons of listening sessions. What keeps you up at night? What is the thing disturbing you most right now? And you listen and you hear and you see where you find common ground. If all of our students, and we saw great energy for environmental sustainability last year. We had some amazing listening sessions on Queens being green. These students are so knowledgeable in these issues. They care so deeply. We know they have passion. So it starts with listening, understanding where people are at. And then we say, we listen to the whole freshman class, and we heard that you really care about environmental sustainability on the Queens campus, and that you really care about immigrant issues for your peers, or whatever the issue is. And then you move to education. Okay, we have to get educated on this issue. We have such a richness of faculty who can teach us all about immigration issues. And we learn what's happening on other campuses in North Carolina. Where do they stand? And then we say, well, what's an achievable goal? Where can we create change? When there was an executive order in 2017, the students were worried about their classmates being safe. So they approached President Davies with some requests, and she accepted all of them. So it's about saying, okay, what can we do? What are other campuses doing? How can we create safety for our peers? And so we educate ourselves, we set goals. What is something reasonable that we can attain? We're not going to advocate and build energy and organize for something that's not attainable. And then we say, okay, who's got the most power over Dr. Davies, right? Like, maybe we need to have coffee with her husband, or, maybe we need to see her secretary could open up time for us. But you know what? We know the board alum have huge power, right? Maybe we need to get in touch with alumni or donors, or, who's got that influence? Of course, students have the most influence, and the students met with her. So we decide, what are our advocacy goals? How are we going to get there? And then we stop and reflect, okay, how do we do? If we got a goal, you have to celebrate. Like, yes, it is a long road to getting to justice, right? You can't say racial justice is my goal. That's too far of a goal. You have to go step by step by step. So that is the way, I always do it. I figure if it's going to be too divisive, then it shouldn't be done. It shouldn't be done in this way. Now, there's an interesting congregation in Boston that has the traction model. So you could have two groups, right? One working on gun rights and another group on campus working on, gun violence prevention. Now, the truth is there's common ground there. So what if we had traction plan and we had traction model and there was a lot of passion for both issues on campus? Well, let's teach them how to move forward. And wouldn't it be amazing if they could find common ground for advocacy as they move forward?
I love how you keep mentioning common ground and listening and people talking to each other, because I feel like that's a big part of where we would actually move forward by, really spending time and instead of, really thinking that, okay, this person is totally on the outside of what I believe, because most of the time when you start to have conversations like that, you do find a lot of common ground, and it's just a matter of really getting into spaces and actually being able to do that. And, we have the election coming up. And so, whether or not people have been spending time, talking to people who are different than them, just to really find out a little bit more about what's important to them and why it's important to them. And then I also wonder about after the election is over, because we are going to have somebody's going to win and somebody is going to lose. And what is that going to look like? Are people going to be able to come and sit down and talk to one another and say, okay, how do we support the results of this election? How do we come together as a country and really be able to just, accept what the results are? My issues are still important to me, but let's move forward and figure out how my issues can still be addressed at the same time. And so, it's just something that I think about regularly in terms of how we move forward with whatever the results of the election is. We first got to get out there and vote. People still have to get out there and vote. And then after that, whatever happens, we have to be able to accept it and be able to come together and figure out how we move forward as a country.
Yeah, and I think just adding on to that, I think it's, for me personally, it's, thinking about some of the issues that I care deeply about, especially around immigration. I think regardless of who wins, sort of that fight to make a better world for immigrants and migrants in this country, I think that will still be there, right? There will still be these issues that we can still be working on, right? And sort of rally behind. And I think that's, finding these communities to be able to, post-election to continue to sort of advocate for different communities, different causes as well. And the conversation around equity and diversity isn't just going to go away, right, with the vote of any person, right? And I think it's a community issue of one where we all work together.
Somebody wrote, what is Gabby's question, Jen? I don't have the full, how do you think we can keep up
how do you think we can keep up the momentum for movements after the election?
So, I loved what Daryl said, and Joey about, whether we win or lose, whether our candidate wins or loses, really focusing on issues. What matters to you most deeply and how can I help you? So I think we have to stay focused on issues, before and after that. Just because candidates are in doesn't mean we're moving issues forward. So I think we have to, remain in conversation and remain engaged civically and politically to move the issues that matter most to us forward. And I think that means creating space on campus for conversations we want to have. We talked about, Daryl, Joey, and I, before this, as we were planning, when we were on campus in 2016, we had s'mores and a fireside conversation after the election. And I think we need well, Daryl and I were talking about going and making a campfire and having that opportunity for people to reflect and share voices and that space. And then we're very unique. I think we're probably the only place in Charlotte that has an interfaith chapel, right? We have an interfaith chapel and we have a big chapel. So we could literally take all of our interfaith team and have us in different places. And that includes secular, right? The spiritual worldviews. What does it mean to really have a service before the election about the values that are part of our society, our democracy that we're so blessed to live in? So we need to create those spaces, those social justice spaces, those spiritual spaces, those diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces for people to continue to be in conversation. The other part, relationship building, is like the first stepping stone. It's about relationships. People come in and say, I want to solve this. but you can't. My favorite quote is by a woman, I'm blanking on her name, and I hate to do that right now, but she's an Aboriginal abolitionist, Lilla Watson. And she said, if you're coming here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you're coming because my redemption is tied up with yours, then let us work together. So we don't do for people, we do with people, and it all starts with relationships. So I think we dig deep into relationships after the election and really build up our community in that way.
Okay, we've got another one. Finding common ground is a good idea. It seems that therein lies the challenge from my perspective. It seems that social media and mainstream media thrives on creating divisions, and now the division is greater than ever. How do you address this challenge?
I mean,
Go ahead, Joey. No.
well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's about building relationships, which is what Judy just said. You know, I think of some of my own stereotypes and perspectives that I had growing up just from certain media influences. And then once I was able to actually build relationships with people who were different than me, you know, I'm thinking in particular with the Muslim community. I had never met a Muslim until I came to college. And then it was through building that relationship, through that those conversations, that time spent together, that I was able to actually, you know, bridge some of those divisions that were created. And I mean, it is, I think it's, you know, it takes time. You know, I think you have to prioritize that relational piece of it. But I mean, I think that's one of the most effective ways to sort of challenge the social media sphere of stereotypes, and especially with anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and like just on the rise. I think it's actually getting down and building these relationships with people who are your neighbors. I mean, that to me is just significant. We live in such a diverse city, but yet there is still probably so many people who have never built a relationship with someone different than them. So I think that's one important aspect of it.
So, yeah, I was going to add that, you know, the building relationships. So I don't do much on social media. And I think social media is a great thing because, you know, there's so much value to it, but it also can be that thing that just really tears us apart. You know, I mean, if we start to, you think about if you send an email to somebody and then you could easily read into that email and what it's saying, and you start putting some of your own narrative into what you think the person is saying, as opposed to, you know, face-to-face conversation that you have with someone where you can actually know that, okay, you know, that wasn't meant to be. Social media, when you start reading some of the things on social media, it's just harder to really be ugly to somebody face to face, I would say. You know, I remember when we did a conversation after the 2016 election, and just had, you know, it was the most beautiful thing to have that many people with different views sitting at the table together and being able to share. And for, you know, students saying, oh, I'm not ready to finish yet because this is the first time I've ever sat at a table with someone who had a different view than me. But you know, for me to actually hear them out and understand a little bit more about what they're feeling. And that's really what you do. And it's not always going to be that everybody's not going to be in space where we're going to be able to create that space for you to do that. And so I think we have to dig deep within ourselves to figure out, like, how do we do that? Sometimes for me to go and say, I'm just going to go and do this with my neighbor may be exactly the same as me. You know, that's not necessarily it. So it's like for me to get outside of my comfort zone and figure out who might have a different view than I do, you know? And I think that's really where it starts, is for us to go outside of that comfort zone and really seek out people who are different, and be able to really listen to what they're saying, as opposed to feeling like, okay, I just want to get my views on the table.
All right, I hate to wrap this because I think we're just starting to get into some of this. Lauren asked a really good question too. So I'll let you guys give final thoughts on this before we wrap up. Everything you were just talking about, how do you foster that desire in others to want to have those conversations?
I think everyone's tired. Everyone is exhausted by this political climate. And I think just, I tell clergy, you know, sometimes I'll meet white clergy who are having trouble building relationships with their Black clergy neighbors. I'm like, just show up at a celebration of your, you know, or show up at a birthday event or show up at a lunch, you know, show up as a neighbor in their time of challenge or their time of joy, or send them a note, something that's outside the realm, the topic that you're looking at, just in terms of friendship building. I care about you and I'm just reaching out. So we need to start on that most basic level, because without relationships, I don't think we can go, you know, up the ladder to collectively create the change that we want to change.
I agree with Trudy. Just show up. I think showing up to spaces. I always think of one of our professors a few years ago, Mark Kelso, in his Hunter Hamilton Award speech. He talked about, you know, the importance of just being present, right? Just showing up. And so I think that has sort of stuck with me of just how important that is. And then just showing up, you're going to meet people. If those people are also showing up, you're going to meet people who have this desire. And so I think it's putting yourself in these spaces.
So, and I totally agree with both of you. I think a big part of this thing is really for us to model that behavior. You know, we need to give younger people, and we just need to give other people something to look at and say, okay, this is how you're supposed to do it. You know, when we can sit and be civil with one another and we can model that kind of behavior, that's really what's needed in order for people to be able to say, wow, you know, this person was really on this side of the spectrum and this person really on this side of the spectrum, but they're having a decent conversation here. You know, they're able to sit down and have decent conversation. That's really what it's all about. Somebody has to start to model what it looks like to be able to, you know, be civil in these cases.
I just want to add, once we actually can be in person together, Daryl and I have lunch pretty much every day, Monday through Friday, in the Queen's Cafeteria, where we have these conversations, and we really talk like across the spectrum of lots of different topics. And, you know, most of the time, a lot of the times we agree, but a lot of times we also disagree. And so if y'all ever interested in joining us for these really captivating conversations, you're more than welcome to join us for a lunchtime conversation. So with that, Jen, you can.
Thanks, Joe. I'm like, we got to stop. Okay, so, yep, join them for lunch. If you are far away and you can't join for lunch, that's okay, because this is not just limited to our Queens community, but you're welcome to jump on any virtual chats that we have in the future. Next is Dr. Susan Rucker is going to be talking about healthcare and healthcare disparities in our local community. And then also, please keep in mind, bunch of information in the chat, but early voting in North Carolina starts this Thursday. So please make sure you show up and you vote. I also post a link to vote.org. So if you are not local in North Carolina, you can visit that link, and it has all the early voting information for every single state in America. So get out and vote, please. And hopefully we will see you next week. And one more quick bit of information. Anyone who has attended any of these sessions, you'll be getting a package from me in the mail. We have enough t-shirts to be able to send to everyone. So you'll get a t-shirt and a voter face mask. Wear them proud. And thank you so much for continuing to support our voter initiatives. I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks, Daryl, Joey, and Judy, and everybody else. Bye.
Thank you, Jen.